Will creatine make my butt bigger? This was a question that I was asked by one of my clients, and I was just kind of dumbfounded by the ideal of it. But then I remembered our job as a health and wellness expert, or personal trainer or coaches, is to debunk all the misinformation and educate the public. So let's start. What exactly is creatine? Creatine is an organic compound that our bodies produce. It can be found in meats such as fish and beef. Creatine is synthesized. That word. Creatine is synthesized. Creatine is synthesized by three amino acids: methionine, glycine, and arginine. Now, what exactly does that do for my butt? In order to answer that, we have to understand the creatine phosphate system. In order for our muscles to contract, or sprint, or deadlift, our bodies need energy, and that energy is in the form of a molecule called ATP, or in other words, adenosine triphosphate. After ATP is broken down after a sprint or a deadlift, that ATP is then converted into ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which can't be used as energy by the body. And this is where creatine phosphate comes into play. About 1/3 of creatine is stored in our muscles, and 2/3 is stored in our muscles as creatine phosphate. This creatine phosphate donates one phosphate to the ADP, which then gets converted back into ATP. These efforts, such as a heavy deadlift and a max effort sprint, could only last a couple of seconds, maybe 5 to 10, because we only have a limited supply of that creatine phosphate in our muscle. So after that sprint, deadlift, or squat, we have to stop. And then we're breathing heavy, our heart's pounding, in order to replenish that creatine phosphate through a different system which requires oxygen. And after we catch our breath, which takes about a minute or two, that's when that creatine phosphate starts to replenish back. So with all that said, is there a way to increase our creatine phosphate number? And this is where creatine supplementing would come into play. With supplementing with creatine, we could increase our creatine phosphate numbers by up to 4 to 45%. Studies show that 5 grams of creatine per day might be enough just for most individuals. And yes, creatine can be found in foods such as fish and beef, but the issue is they're in small traces, so in order to get those numbers, you'd have to eat lots of fish and beef. But this doesn't tell me will my butt get bigger after supplementing with creatine. The answer is yes and no, and I'll explain why. The butt, or aka the gluteus maximus, is a muscle, and we train that muscle in order for it to grow. Now, let's say we're hip thrusting 315 pounds on a barbell, and we're only able to do 8 reps. Now, after supplementing with creatine for a few days, we then notice that we're able to do 320 pounds on that barbell for 10 reps. With the introduction and exposure to these higher loads and more volume would then equal greater gains over time with adaptation. Or if you're a sprinter, you're able to hold that max effort sprint for a few seconds longer. So in closing, to answer my client's question, will creatine give me a bigger butt? I'm gonna say it doesn't, aside from intracellular water retention. But in the long run, with supplementing with creatine, you may notice some slight gains with the proper training, programming, and dieting. So would I recommend it to my client? Absolutely. With that said, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section. And if you enjoy the content, go ahead and like and subscribe. With that said, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it down in the comment section. And if you enjoy the content, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.